If history records good things of good men, the thoughtful hearer is encouraged to imitate what is good. Or if it records evil of wicked men, the devout, religious listener or reader is encouraged to avoid all that is sinful and perverse and to follow what he knows to be good and pleasing to God. Hello again, sweet darlings. That quote that you just heard was from today's saint, St Bede the Venerable, who actually is someone that I have heard before because I studied Anglo-Saxon history and Roman history of Britain during my A-levels when I moved to the UK. So Bede is a name that I recognized when I was putting together this booklet for May. What I didn't know though was that he entered monastic life at the age of 7, or a few other interesting facts that I want to share with you now before we dive into making a beef barley stew in his honor, a lovely hearty dish, although not a dish I think for a hot day like today. I'm sitting inside with the curtains drawn because it is baking hot for England. We're never happy in England. If it's raining, we're unhappy. If it's sunny, we're too hot. But I think that's maybe just part of the English weather system. But St Bede the Venerable is often called the father of English history, and he was a Benedictine monk, scholar, and historian who spent most of his life in the two monasteries of Wearmouth and Yarrow in Northumbria. He entered monastic life at the age of 7, was ordained a priest at 30, and dedicated his life entirely to prayer, study, and writing. His most famous work is it chronicles the Christianization of England, while his treatise on time popularized the Anno Domini dating system. He was declared a doctor of the church in 1899. The two monasteries, about 7 miles apart near the Tyne River, were closely linked, sharing resources, leadership, and a commitment to Benedictine monasticism. Yarrow, where Bede spent most of his adult life, housed a remarkable library stocked with manuscripts brought from Rome and elsewhere by Biscop, fostering Bede's prolific scholarship. The monasteries featured stone churches, which was a rarity in Anglo-Saxon England, and a scriptoria, where monks like Bede copied and composed texts. Despite occasional disruptions such as Viking raids, decades after Bede's death, these monasteries were oases of stability, prayer, and intellectual rigor during a turbulent era in England's history. So I did just include that quote at the beginning from his Ecclesiastical History of the English People, which I do remember that I read during A-level. It probably is a little bit hefty for me to read now, but who knows, maybe one day I'll get back to it. I really enjoyed making this dish, and I've actually made it a couple times since I tested the recipe. It's great because it doesn't call for too much beef, and I found that it's very forgiving because the flavor is quite strong because of the lovely Worcester sauce and tomato paste that you add into the sauce. You can kind of take out some of the beef if you don't have as much, and you can add in more vegetables. So now, having made this a couple times, one time I used about 500 grams of chuck steak, and another time I used probably about 250 grams, so about half, and it was still just as tasty. You can always add in more barley. You can make the sauce a little bit more liquidy if you want to dip bread in. I've always served it with crusty bread, but it's definitely going to become a firm favorite in my house. I love a beef casserole, and this is a nice alternative. The barley really makes it a very warming, filling dish, and sometimes there's a little bit left over for lunch the next day, which is great. But without further ado, let's make this together, and I really hope that you enjoy making it for your families as well. Okay, so I started, as I always do, getting my chopping board out and my ingredients. For this recipe, you need 3 stalks of celery, 2 large carrots, 2 cloves of garlic, although I added 4. You either need half a cup of red wine or 3 ounces of tomato paste, and I use tomato paste for this because we don't tend to keep much wine in the house. We're not big drinkers. A cup of diced tomatoes canned is fine. I didn't have this. And 6 cups of beef broth, or up to 8 cups or more. So I actually used chicken broth because I didn't have any beef broth, but I added in a little bit of Worcester sauce for some extra flavor here. You also need salt and pepper, obviously, and about 2 pounds of beef. And you want to cube this. You don't want the bits to be too big because you want it to cook and simmer through. So while you're chopping up your veggies, and I have sped this up, so don't worry, I don't usually chop vegetables this fast, you want to get your oil heating over a medium to high heat. Now, I never use olive oil, which is what this recipe calls for. I do use lard, so if you have something like that on hand, you can use that, or at a pinch, you could always use some butter if you're out of cooking oil, which has definitely happened to me in the past. But just dice those those carrots as small as you can, and the celery as well. I find celery so satisfying to slice. I don't know about you guys, but it's just so nice and crunchy, and I don't often use it, but putting it into this recipe has made me appreciate it again, and I'm looking forward to getting some more. Usually I found when I bought this I had enough to make the recipe twice, which was great. So I suppose if I added this to my real meal rotation, I could buy 1 pack of celery and make a double batch of this stew and maybe freeze half or something like that for an easy lunch or a warming dinner if we were coming back late from church or from a friend's house, which is always a good occasion to have something like this, which is easy on hand to pull out of the freezer and is really flavorful. It certainly doesn't skimp on the flavor, which I really like. This little container here that I'm going to show you is probably one of the best things I ever bought. This is a giant ice cube tray, but it measures each of those cubes as like 250 milliliters, which is perfect for chicken broth. So that's what I use this for. Whenever I roast a chicken, I make chicken broth in my slow cooker overnight. I then pour that in, and I know that I have enough broth for upcoming recipes, and knowing that these are all the same size as well is super helpful. So I would highly recommend, if you don't have some of these already and you like making chicken broth or you like using homemade broth, those are a godsend. You can also then just pop those cubes out into a freezer bag, which I've done before when I've been making a lot of broth. Here I am just adding the tomato paste into the mixture, which is sizzling away nicely on the stovetop, using my cast iron pan because I love them so much and I don't have other pans. Also adding in my Worcester sauce here, adding in a good dollop, probably more than just a few splashes, which is what the recipe calls for. And then when I had warmed up my broth in another pan, I just poured that over and added a lid on top. Now the recipe does say to kind of let this simmer for an hour to an hour and a half. I think I had about 45 minutes of this simmering away, and the second time I did it, it probably was on for even less. But I think it really depends on the condition of your ingredients to an extent, because often I will let beef defrost at room temperature during the day, and then it's already kind of pre-warmed, and it seems to help when I'm cooking it. You also could choose to cut that beef into even smaller pieces so that it doesn't take so long to cook through. My toddler's always very keen to get involved here, and she really wanted to stir it even though it was hot. So I just quickly made sure that I could supervise, which isn't that easy with this wall in the way, but we managed just fine. And luckily she's got her little stool that she can stand up on. But it's always nice when she wants to help. I did probably add more than the 1 cup of barley here, because the first time I made it, it was a really chunky stew, and we definitely had way more left over than the second time, but maybe the second time we were just hungrier. So, but I probably did add more than the cup of barley that the recipe called for. I forgot to mention earlier that you'll add bay leaves to this. The recipe also calls for fresh thyme and rosemary. I didn't have these, unfortunately. I usually would have fresh rosemary from my garden, but my rosemary plant has died, which is devastating to me. So that is definitely on my wish list of things to get when we go past a garden center next time, because that is a herb that I use often, and it just adds a lot of flavor to something like roast potatoes or roast chicken. And here I am just adding in some flavor another way by adding about 4 cloves of garlic into the mix as well, while I enjoy a lovely coffee after Lent that my husband made me. While the stew is just finishing off, I just sliced up some sourdough bread that I'd made earlier in the day. I think even on a warm day, there's something so comforting about being able to dip something into the stew. And definitely when we were finishing off, we were running the bread around the edge of the cast iron pan, which I know is not very civilized, but we didn't have guests, so we felt that we could do that. And we do love to do that when I make something with a nice sauce and I serve it with toast. We just can't resist that last little bit of flavor. I was pleased that my toddler liked it as well. She is a little bit hesitant to try new things at the moment, but this was a favorite with everybody, which was so nice. And because of the barley, it really was filling. You didn't need to have a full bowl, just a couple of decent spoonfuls really saw us through the day after lunch until we had dinner. So that's why I'm in love with this recipe. I really hope you guys will all enjoy making it. Do drop a comment down how you're enjoying the May recipe booklet, any of your favorites so far, and I really hope to see you all here again soon for another video. In the meantime, take good care, everybody, and God bless.